Good evening. Periodically, every 10 minutes, we will be checking the score. I hope you don't mind. It won't take me but a moment to bring out my phone, bring up the score, and I'll tell you what's going on.
The Phillies are up 1-0.
That wasn't the score I had in mind. Remember what city you're in. Now, everybody saw what they saw, right? And we're talking about long before the debate. We'd watch President Biden get up and give a speech. We'd see him walk gingerly from Air Force One to his limousine. And it was very evident and common knowledge that he was no longer 55 years old. And that continued to be the general impression, at least in the press, until a debate that you moderated with your colleague, Dana Bash. Why was this book so necessary, Alex?
Because what everyone saw in public was much worse behind the scenes. And then especially starting in 2023, 2024, that, aging can be a little bit and then all at once. And essentially what was happening is people in the White House were trying to conceal the Biden that we all saw on the debate stage. There were many moments of him acting like that behind the scenes. So they began restricting hours, restricting who could see him. And ultimately, the reason why this book was necessary is because it's not just about Joe Biden. It's also a story about how Trump won and came back.
And we'll absolutely get that. But I want to put a certain amount of exactitude on our coverage. At one point in your book, you write that as early as 2019, before he's elected president, and then 2020, there were incidents in which he was, and you used the phrase non-functioning. Explain what that means.
So I think that for any of us who have witnessed or dealt with aging relatives, grandparents, parents, loved ones, we know that the process produces good days and bad days, good moments and bad moments, and that it's not just a clear decline. And what we uncovered, so after the election, when Alex and I set out to figure out just what the hell happened, and we were honestly stunned to find all the people that had been either telling us that President Biden was fine behind the scenes or just not returning our calls, emails, or texts. That we spoke with more than 200 people, almost all of them Democratic insiders, people who loved Joe Biden, people who supported Joe Biden, but I think they felt the need to unburden themselves now that the risk of Trump was no longer a risk, it was a reality. And what they described was starting as far back as 2015, when his beloved Beau died, his son, which one top aide described as watching somebody, that Joe Biden's psyche was like watching water poured on sand. That starting then, there were moments of this non-functioning Biden, and by that I mean the Biden that we saw on the debate stage, that for a lot of us was shocking.
I'm sorry, you're saying 10 years ago.
Yeah.
There were moments, even prolonged moments, and how frequent is my question, where he was as lost as he was on the debate stage.
I don't know about that lost, but moments of non-functioning. I think those moments came increasingly, and I think that they got worse. I think that one of the reasons why President Obama did not want Joe Biden to run in 2016, or this isn't my opinion, we know that one of the reasons he didn't want him to is because he didn't think he could. And at first, when I first heard that, I thought that was just because of grief and the natural process of this is not something you can get over in a couple months and then run for president. But the more I think about it, and Alex and I have talked about this, the more I wonder how much of that was tied to what that top aide said that they saw with Biden.
But Jake, if that's the case, if Barack Obama felt that he had to support Hillary Clinton over Joe Biden, not only because he thought she had the best chance of winning, but also because he thought Joe Biden was starting to lose it. There are ways to get that message out.
Yeah. Well, I think it was mainly because
he doesn't have to go on CNN. He doesn't have to talk to Axios on the record, or God forbid, the New Yorker, and say, Joe Biden's had it. There's a way you tell an aide, the aide tells somebody else, it's off the record, they whisper in Alex's ear, and the next thing you know, it's starting to circulate.
Or you can be Barack Obama and not endorse Joe Biden in 3 straight elections, which happened. He didn't support him in 2016, he didn't support him in 2020, and his position in 2024 was behind the scenes very skeptical. I mean, I think there were ways that he was doing it.
He campaigned for him in 2020.
He campaigned for him in 2020 once the party rallied around Joe Biden because they were terrified Bernie Sanders was going to get the nomination. Not before Iowa, not before New Hampshire, not before Nevada or South Carolina. But in any case, back to the question you asked, like, one of the things that Robert Hur, the special counsel, when he was investigating Joe Biden for mishandling classified information, one of the things he was stunned and his team was stunned to learn was Joe Biden had, he's written 2 memoirs, and the one that he wrote, that he began the process of writing in 2017 after his vice presidency, there were these recordings, and you might remember the ghostwriter deleted them, and then the FBI found out about them, and he undeleted them. And when they listened to those recordings from 2017, 2018, they were shocked at how addled Vice President Biden sounded on those recordings in 2017.
Addled is the word.
Well, that's not their word, that's my word, but he was losing his train of thought, unable to come up with dates, concerned. And then, of course, flash forward to 2023 when the special counsel sits down with President Biden and provides that window into what 5 hours with President Biden looks like from a point of view of somebody who doesn't work for President Biden. Mm-hmm. And then comes the Hur report where he says he seems like a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
And the Hur report was criticized, not least by Democrats, for being punitive, exaggerating, nasty.
Gratuitous was the word they used. Gratuitous.
And yet, I think you'd argue now, having heard the tape, that Hur was being
kind.
Charitable.
Yeah.
Charitable. You disagree?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think if you go and you listen to him, and I can tell you, the White House officials behind the scenes were insisting, the ones that were briefed on inside the room, they said it wasn't as bad, he was fine, yeah, he was like a little windy, but that's just Joe. You know, that was sort of their spin at the time, and their response to it was to attack their own attorney general, attack their own Justice Department, and made it so in order to protect Joe Biden's candidacy, they tried to destroy Robert Hur. He wasn't able to find a job for several months, and I think, as we've heard the tapes, I think he's been vindicated, and the people in the White House that were insisting that it was just a normal day don't look as good.
Alex, when we were talking for the New Yorker Radio Hour, you said to me something very interesting, in that the campaign for 2020, the first campaign, that in a way COVID did him an enormous favor, because so much of the campaign, well, it just wasn't as rigorous or as vigorous a campaign by necessity. You'd run around the country and all the restrictions and such.
Work from home.
Yeah, half of us are still there. And could he have won the presidency, in your view, in 2020, had there been no COVID?
Well, some people in his own campaign doubt that he could have done it without COVID. And it's not because Donald Trump was hurt politically because of his handling the pandemic. They actually started having doubts late in the primary campaign that he could keep up the rigor that would come with that campaign. The sort of dark joke on the campaign was that COVID was one of the worst things to happen to the world, but one of the best things to happen to Joe Biden and his political campaign.
I have to say, having now read your book once very slowly, and we excerpted it in the New Yorker very happily, and then again to prepare for tonight and to refresh my memory about this, I cannot believe, knowing what one knows about Washington and campaigns and people's lack of discretion that this story, which is so consequential, somehow didn't reach either one of you or the New York Times or the Washington Post in much fuller form, that there was what you call a cover-up or a conspiracy of silence, not only began longer ago than we would imagine, but was in a sense, and I use this with scare quotes around it, so successful and airtight. Were we just not trying hard enough?
Well, it almost worked, right? If he ends up, having the same night he had on the debate stage, the night he had at the State of the Union, like it just, they were, it was becoming more unpredictable when that Biden was going to show up. But, if he just has a good or just better night, then it's very possible that he could be president right now.
How did the presidency work? You guys use a phrase that I know well from my days of covering the Soviet Union, the Politburo. And as I understand it, it was a group of about 4 or 5 people, advisors, and I guess I would include in the Politburo Jill Biden and the family. How did it work from day to day, and did it change as time went by, Jake, from 2020 to the end of the presidency?
So we're not actually the ones that came up with a Politburo, for those of us who aren't Russia scholars. It was people in the administration called it that. Actually, I think I was...
From day one?
I don't know about day one, but it took shape once it became clear there was a committee running things. And it was Mike Donnellan, who had been with Biden since 1981, Steve Ricchetti, who had been with him for some time too, was a lobbyist and a very loyal aide. And then obviously the family is a big part of it. The Politburo does not include the family. The family is its own innermost circle, and that's, I would say, the president, the first lady, and Hunter Biden. Politburo is, so Donnellan, Ricchetti, and then there were different other people that would float in and out.
People like that. Yeah. Bruce Reed.
Bruce Reed. Reed is part of it, but he's just the policy guy, kind of. So, I feel like he didn't really have the, he wasn't really, pushing or pulling in terms of, cover-up stuff. But there was the First Lady's chief of staff, Anthony Bernal, the most powerful chief of staff to a First Lady in the history of First Ladies. Another woman, Annie Tomasini, who worked on her staff and then became a deputy chief of staff to the president. And just other people floating in around, Anita Dunn, Ron Klain, but Ron Klain leaves as chief of staff in early 2023 to rotate. But the bottom line is, it is a group of people who are watching the president deteriorate, and some are lying to themselves and the country, others are lying to just the country, but they are watching this all happen. And by 2023, they are cordoning off the president, not just from reporters, not just from as many public events before 10 a.m. or after 4 p.m. as much as possible.
But there's a limit on how much you can do this. He's the president of the United States. Okay, maybe his workday starts at 10 and he quits at 4, and he doesn't work the kind of hours that Teddy Roosevelt did or anything of the sort.
Roosevelt gave a speech with a bullet in his chest. I mean,
well, but he also has to meet with his security advisors. He has to make decisions. He has to read. He has to travel. And you can find ways to cut corners and let him rest more. And obviously, he gave far fewer press conferences than any president in memory. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but it wasn't a happy number.
It was very few. I mean, he's the first president, perhaps ever, but it's certainly in decades that never gave.
But every time Donald Trump coughs, Maggie Haberman and 20 other reporters seem to know it by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. How does this get carried? How did this maintain itself so successfully for so long?
Well, one, I think it was I think there were 2 things going on. One is that I think this Politburo, unlike Donald Trump, there's a lot of factions within Donald Trump. There weren't really nearly as many factions around Joe Biden.
So they're in Trump's world, they're leaking on each other.
100%.
although not as bad as they were in the first.
Much worse in the first, and also Trump himself
constantly calls reporters.
It's like a live stream. It's almost nothing you don't, he'll.
Don't give him ideas.
Yeah, and in the middle of the night, when reporters are sleeping, he just goes onto Truth Social to say it, right? I mean,
Right. But what makes it confusing? And
can I give you an answer to the question?
Okay.
The answer
I'm sorry.
is, the question is, how were they able to do this? How were they able, in addition to hiding it from as many people as possible, and starting in 2023, they started to cordon him off from cabinet secretaries, from White House staffers, from Democratic members of Congress, from donors, from governors, et cetera. But beyond that, and you can see this in the response to our book on social media, on Blue Sky, et cetera, the threat of Donald Trump was existential, and from the point of view of this group, and the idea that only Joe Biden had ever beaten Donald Trump, only Joe Biden could beat Donald Trump, and to say anything contrary to supporting Joe Biden was helping to elect Donald Trump. That kept a lot of people quiet.
So the critique, not so much of your book, but of you and us, is that we, in a sense, were an extension of this cover-up. That our, meaning the mainstream media, desire to strip back the layers and show this raw, was influenced by the fact that we didn't want to see Donald Trump be president a second time.
I think there was some of that. I think, as you know, the media, mainstream media, especially the right wing, likes to paint it with a broad brush, but it's complicated. I think some people, some reporters, let their own sort of personal feelings, political feelings, influence their coverage? Yeah, I think so.
What's the evidence of that?
Just having, worked at the White House every day for 4 years.
You saw people say, don't.
It's just, you get a sense with how people talk about certain things, right? Or they just didn't have as much skepticism, or they would just sort of believe it. People would just make comments that you were surprised were a little bit more partisan than maybe you'd think. But I don't think that was the majority. I also think that Washington does have this capacity for groupthink. And people, it's a company town, so you're constantly seeing every single person, and in some ways it can be self-reinforcing because it's not as much fun to be sort of on the outside. And I think that also led to a lack of skepticism and a lack of curiosity.
You know where I think the line is, and Alex said this earlier today, and I agree with him. I think the Robert Hur report was a real delineation, because when that report came out, I think my reaction was, holy crap. That's stunning. And there are some reporters that covered it that way because it was obvious that something had been going on. Like you said, we've all been watching him age and have moments that seemed odd. And then all of a sudden, here's a guy saying, I can't prosecute him. He seems so old and helpless. And there are some reporters who repeated what the Democrats were saying, gratuitous, how dare he? And some reporters that, Alex that day, his headline was straight up what happened. And I just think that that's a real demarcation, because that is a window into Joe Biden's world that had been kept from us.
But I want to push back on this a little bit, because to me it's a little bit too black and white. So on the radio hour, 2 years ago, I had on, the hour was split between, we had the chief gerontologist for, I believe, Mount Sinai on, who proceeded to tell me, nice, people age at different rates, and, he's running policy. In a way, in effect, the outcome of that interview was Joe Biden can be, some people are super agers, and they can be president, no problem, until 86 years old. Then I had Jane Mayer and Jill Lepore on. Jane Mayer is a journalist for The New Yorker, and Jill Lepore is a historian at Harvard, also writes for The New Yorker. And they got on and said, what are you, crazy? Look at him. They were a little more polite than that, but within the confines of the politesse of the New Yorker radio hour, they were critical. And Jill Lepore was describing her, 19 and 20-year-old students who were watching this, and they weren't jumping out of their seats necessarily to vote for Donald Trump, but they were really disaffected by this. On the other hand, Biden was very anti-giving interviews, or the Politburo was. He gave one to Evan Osnos, who's been covering him for quite a long time. They sat together for the better part of an hour in the Oval Office, and we had a conversation beforehand. And I said, he'll say what he says about this, that, and the other thing, but his affect and his fluency or lack of fluency and his behavior has to be a big part of what you write about. And of course, Evan agreed with this, and we discussed it as he came out of the room. And he said, look, he's not Joe Biden of 20 years ago who had the gift of gab beyond measure, but he was, it was like the State of the Union address. Mm-hmm. He had what you call a good day.
Yeah. And that's how they were able to, like a lot of older people, they have good days and they have bad days. They have good hours and they have bad hours. And you can, Joe Biden could be here right now and come across just the way that Evan Osnos thought he did in that interview. And this White House was managing him, so when he was in public giving remarks, but even that, it was, they did their best to make sure it was good day Biden.
But Jake, you call this worse than Watergate. Tell me what that means.
I said it might be worse than Watergate, and I think, and the reason I say maybe is because of just how shocked Alex and I were by what we found out of just his inability to come up with the name of Jake Sullivan in December 2022, his inability to recognize George Clooney in June 2024. One of the moments that
But explain the worst in Watergate, because I think there you're talking about consequence.
I'm not talking about criminal activity, okay? People went to jail for Watergate. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what was being hidden. It's, I don't know how one judges which scandal is worse than the other, but this is what I keep thinking about. Senator Michael Bennet from Colorado, Democrat, centrist-ish, goes to the White House in June 2024, a couple weeks before the debate. It's an immigration event. And President Biden has a moment on stage that neurologists tell us it seems neurological. It's not a stutter, it's not a gaffe, it's not that he can't come up with a name. Something's going on. There's some weird moment, and I urge you to go home and Google it if you want to see what I'm talking about, because it's really shocking. And Bennett leaves the White House thinking, this is why our immigration policy is so messed up, because this guy can't manage the portfolio. There are competing interests in his administration, and he's not there saying, no, we want this, we don't want that. He's not engaged, he's not doing it. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas thought that when he started in 2021, that he was going to be given an order to do something to close the border, to shut down the border to a degree, and the order never came. And so why I say it may be worse than Watergate is because I'm thinking about the ramifications on our lives. And I'm not, Watergate is horrible, and I'm not saying that it was anything other than that, a president participating in rank criminalities, an offense in all senses. But the idea that a president not in firm command of his faculties was there and people saw it and weren't doing anything, and there was kind of just this, the administration kind of drifted to the left in his first couple years. And when there was that spending plan, was the American Recovery Act, yeah. And Lawrence Summers, the former Treasury Secretary for Clinton. Right, he was NEC for Clinton, for Obama.
Then was for Obama.
Anyway, but Lawrence Summers was warning, this is going to cause inflation. Here's my question. Did Biden even know that Larry Summers was out there saying that? that's what I keep thinking about. Like,
That's a
what?
supposition. You don't.
I don't know if he did or he didn't, but my point is I don't have confidence that he did. I don't have confidence that anybody was bringing him that information or that he was aware of it. I just know that senators were concerned enough to, after it was all over and too late, to say, I don't know that he knew what was going on. Mark Warner, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, had a conversation with President Biden in October 2023 after Hamas attacked Israel, and the Biden administration was about to release 11 detainees from Gitmo into Oman, and all of the members of the Senate Intelligence Committee were like, do not do that. They called the White House. President Biden calls Mark Warner, and Mark Warner doesn't think Biden knows what's going on with this case.
I don't remember Mark Warner or Michael Bennet, two highly respected lawmakers, speaking up.
Correct.
They didn't. And Democrats
Did
often.
anybody speak up?
I mean, Dean Phillips and Robert Hur, right?
And
That's
Donald
it.
Trump.
Yep. But Dean Phillips, from inside the House, Dean Phillips and Robert Hur.
Well, I think it's a good point that you're making because I think Democrats are also a little bit eager to blame all of this on Biden. But Democratic lawmakers rightfully mock Republicans for saying one thing about Donald Trump in private and another thing in public as they go out and say, dear leader. Well, they're guilty of similar behavior with Joe Biden.
Probably the most striking and certainly the most obscene on the record comment that you guys quoted, and it was in the excerpt too, David Plouffe, who ran the Obama campaign and then took up the Kamala Harris campaign, very elegantly said the following. He fucked us. Now, great that he says this to you, just in time.
Oh, great for you too, right? It
Well,
was in the excerpt.
up to a point, but this was never said by any prominent Democrats. Nobody had the chutzpah to step to the front of the stage and say what they were observing.
They're still not. I mean, look, I don't know how people in this room feel, but
John Lovett is lecturing us, who I think is funny and interesting and insightful about Obama, but John Lovett saw Biden behaving very strangely in a way that the public did not until the fateful night of the debate. And he admitted recently that the reason he didn't say anything is because he wanted he wanted Kamala Harris to win.
right.
Well, and this speaks to, in some ways, and I think the scandal is what if he had won? Because you would have had a president who most people in the administration did not believe he was capable of serving out a second term. And
So this is something that's absolutely has had unbelievable consequences, namely the second Trump presidency.
yes.
I think we can agree that Kamala Harris did not exactly have an optimal amount of time to gather herself as a candidate, and you could argue about whether she was the optimal candidate. It's another set of questions. But when Joe Biden is talked about a lot, I've used the word in print too, I've heard you say it, he's described as decent. How indecent was this behavior of Biden and his circle, and does it color his historical legacy to such a degree that it eclipses much of the rest of it?
I mean, some of it depends on how the Trump presidency goes. I mean, Biden himself framed his entire presidency as sort of...
You're holding judgment on that?
Sorry.
On the Trump presidency?
Oh, no, I mean, we I don't know if you guys know, we had over 1,000 days to go.
I've read that.
Yeah, so, I think, how this continues to go, if there's rolling constitutional crises, showdowns with the Supreme Court, and who else knows what could potentially happen. I think that colors his legacy even more because he had premised his entire presidency about stopping the forces of Trumpism. You
guys wrote that the Biden family lives in their own reality. Tell me a little bit about that.
So that's not us saying it. It's somebody close to the family saying that the Biden family has a tremendous capacity for denial and for denying ugly reality. The unofficial family motto, the one that the president would never quote publicly, is "Don't call a fat person fat." And that's not because it's impolite, it's because it's a don't acknowledge things that are unfortunate. And that sad way of looking at the world it's just basically it's denial, has reared its head in many ways, whether it's they weren't honest about the sickness of Beau Biden, they weren't honest about the addiction problems of Hunter and Ashley, Hunter's sister. There's a family myth. There's a myth that we all bought into, which is based in reality, which is the myth that Joe Biden always gets back up after he's knocked down. And we've seen these horrible things happen to this man.
Beginning when he was quite young.
From his childhood stutter to his dad's struggles making a living, to the horrible car accident that took the life of his wife and his daughter, and on and on and on. And that ability to get up and keep going is something that so many people admired about him on a personal level, but it also became beyond, this is what people close to the family say, it became more than just a mythology, it became a theology. The faith in Joe Biden, and like any theology, skepticism is not permitted. And that is why by the end, and by the end I mean just like by his one term in the White House, skeptics have been removed. They're heretical. And it's just this group of loyalists. And it's unfortunate, but the same quality that so many people love about Joe Biden, his refusal to give up, meant that he didn't give up when he should have.
Something weird happened preceding your book. Before you published, Joe and Jill Biden went on The View.
How'd that go?
And we'll get to that. And then they gave also an interview to the BBC, am I correct?
Yes.
Neither one of those interviews, I think, had the desired effect, which would be to debunk any notion of really profound aging. Then your book came out, widely discussed, excerpted, published, people talking about it all the time on television, on radio, podcasts. It's ubiquitous in the best sense, and an absolutely necessary book. Then you get an announcement that Joe Biden, age 81, and it's a terrible thing to happen to anyone, announces that he has stage 4 prostate cancer, that it's very aggressive, and it's gone to his bones. What do you make of that sequence?
I mean, we don't have any reporting that they're all absolutely related. We have no reporting that suggests that it's not what they said in terms of they diagnosed it the Friday after our first excerpts and before the Tuesday of our book release and announced it on Sunday. That being said, members of his own White House, including Dr. Zeke Emanuel, who is on his COVID team, have said that the chances of that he had this cancer while he was president are quite high, meaning that they either didn't catch it or they caught it and didn't disclose it. Now, it's possible that this all developed in the last 100 days, but that was from someone on his own COVID team. But I can tell you, there is like a lack of trust, even among people that still love Joe Biden, that they're being forthright about it.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I think a lot of people, I know a lot of people, feel a little disillusioned with the core inner circle around Biden. I think the debate was traumatizing for a lot of them because this is someone that they dedicated a lot of their lives to. And
How could it have been traumatizing if they had experienced it writ small or writ frequently for years. How could they have expected him to go out in front of tens of millions of people in the highest pressure, and by the way, at 9 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
when usually,
Tell me about it. I was tired.
yeah, we'll get to that in a second. How could they have thought that this would go well?
Well, a lot of these people are the people that increasingly were shielded from him. So they did not realize the extent of the decline, especially given 2023, 2024. And a lot of them rationalized those moments that we're talking about as they just were, few and far between.
I think there is a degree to which, now that we're all coming to terms with how addled he was, that people are looking back and thinking, well, we all knew this, and we didn't all know this. We knew he was aging, and we knew he was gaffe prone, which he'd been his entire career, and we knew he was old, but we did not know that he was non-functioning. I don't think. The Joe Biden who came on that debate stage could not articulate, it's not just he couldn't articulate a vision for America, he couldn't answer a question. He would start on a train of thought and then just completely get lost and start grabbing for words and phrases, what I've been able to do with that thing, with the thing, and just like not able, and that's that first horrible answer where he says, we finally beat COVID. I'm sorry, he should have said we finally beat COVID. We finally beat Medicare.
Which is different from COVID.
It's different, yes. One makes sense and the other one does not make sense in that sense. But that, and it was 90 minutes of that. And, I remember the campaign was spinning. It started off slow, but strong finish. There was not a strong finish. It was horrible. The entire thing was horrible. There were moments of just absolute calamity, and then there was back to horrible. And it was shocking. And there were people who worked for Joe Biden who told us.
Do you think he was going to make it through to the end of 90 minutes? It was just perilous to watch. It was just.
Yeah, it was bad. It was worse in person, I have to say, having gone back and watched it on my computer. It was worse in person.
Why is that?
Because the humanity was right there to see it, and it was just upsetting, and he was just completely lost and unable to answer a basic question. And some of the questions that were, that should have, any Democrat running for president would have, any Democrat who wanted to be in Joe Biden's shoes that night, from, Gavin Newsom to Kamala Harris, all of them, would have loved to have had a question about the Dobbs decision. And he can't even basically articulate it, and all of a sudden he's talking about the murder of Laken Riley, which is pretty sure that's not one of his strong arguments.
No.
And then he's talking about women being raped by their brothers and sisters. Pretty sure the sister rape thing is not really an argument in favor of the pro-choice cause. It just completely fumbling around.
And I know we're running around the same tree a little bit, but so I had this experience. Apparently, the thing that he engaged with most was questions of national security.
100%.
According to your book. And these are issues that he'd been engaged with for all his career. And I interviewed the outgoing Secretary of State on, I believe, the last day in office. It might have been January 19th. I can't quite remember the date. And I asked him the obvious question. Didn't you see this? Wasn't this obvious? No, the debate was a shock. He was, my experience was that when we were in conversations about national security, he made decisions, he made the important calls. Maybe he tripped, the usual thing. We tripped over some words and da-da-da-da-da, but you're shaking your head ruefully.
It's just such horseshit. I mean, no offense to Anthony Blinken, and I have a lot of regard for him.
But what you're saying is Anthony Blinken is full of shit.
Yes.
Just to put a pin in it.
Yes, I am. Not out of any malice, because I think he's a good person and I think he means it, but somebody important, told us, I forget how we identified this person in the book, there's so many, I mean, they're still being anonymous, right? But they said, being president is two things, making important decisions and communicating those decisions to the American people. I never saw him not able to make a decision, but the communication he was never able to do, and it got worse throughout his term. And that is
not just a nastier way of saying the same thing that Blinken did?
I don't think it's a nasty. No, it's yes. Maybe it's the same thing. Maybe it's the same thing. But I think not being able to communicate his decisions to the American people, and it got worse, is worse than, yeah, he stumbled a few times. Please don't misunderstand. It's not Antony Blinken that I'm taking issue with. I'm just saying this entire conceit of, yes, he just stumbled a little behind closed doors. It's just not true. I just don't believe it. We wrote the first draft of this, but there will be later drafts. And after President Biden, and I hope it's not for a long, long time, and I know we're all praying for his health, but after President Biden passes, there will be even more people that come forward and are honest about this. This was a calamity. This was hidden from the American people. This was one Democrat who, to this moment, is out there bashing our book publicly. But one Democrat told me, us, that this was Joe Biden's stolen election from the Democratic Party. He stole it from the American people. People know what the truth is.
There are many people, maybe some in this room, who don't have an issue with what you're saying, but there's a kind of what about. And let me read you a quote.
That's how we got here, by the way.
This is a quotation of another president talking about a plan to reopen the Alcatraz prison in San Francisco.
I wonder which president it is.
I'll let you know when I'm finished. The quote goes a little like this. How will you use it? How did you come up with the idea, reporter asked. Well, I guess I was supposed to be a movie maker. We started with the movie making and it will end. It represents something very strong, very powerful in terms of law and order. Our country needs law and order. Alcatraz is, I would say, the ultimate, right? Alcatraz, Sing Sing, and Alcatraz, the movies. But it's right now a museum, believe it or not. A lot of people go there. It housed the most violent criminals of the world, and nobody ever escaped. One person almost got there, but they, as you know the story, they found his clothing rather badly ripped up, and it was a lot of shark bites, a lot of problems.
Have you not seen Escape from Alcatraz?
This gets better. Nobody's ever escaped from Alcatraz and just represented something strong having to do with law and order. We need law and order in this country. He hoped to bring Alcatraz back in large form, add a lot. It sort of represents something that's both horrible and beautiful and strong and miserable, weak. It's got a lot of qualities that are interesting. That
was, unless I'm mistaken, that was John F. Kennedy.
Yeah. It's absolutely right. That guy is 79.
Yeah.
And there will be apparently military parades on his birthday. And these kind of quotations happen all the time. There was a press conference that he gave on the recent trip to the Gulf that was 3 times longer than this, and the people sitting next to him, their faces were melting. What's the difference?
Well, first I would say you can cover both.
I get that.
Yeah.
It's to me it's not an either or, but a lot of people, even those who agree with you, approve of your book, have no issue with your book, would say, okay, that's true, and it's not just a matter of my ideological differences with the president or moral differences or competency differences, but it's that too.
Sure. I mean, I would also say that I think that, and you see this in the polling with voters too, is that he's sounded like that for a long time. And I think that has made it, trickier of making it, is he, from their perspective, is he in decline or is he just still the same crazy?
I think that it's a different division of the hospital. It's one of them. There are questions about a neurodegenerative situation. And the other one, I mean, in his first term, there were all sorts of articles about what personality disorder does he have. And I'm not saying he has one, but I mean, the issue is not cognitive decline, the issue is his personality. I would also say, and this is by no means a justification of anything, it's like, that's not being hidden from anybody. If anything, it's too out there.
But isn't this a reporting problem? In other words, Axios wants to be fair-minded, and CNN certainly wants to be that. Is there a problem in how to report these kind of issues as opposed to lots of other kinds of issues?
Sure.
Journalistically.
Sure, in part because there is no forcing mechanism to make any president candid about their health. They can, and the thing is, like, Joe Biden wasn't candid about his health. I mean, he's not the first one. He's not going to be the last one. Go back to George Washington, was not candid about his health. President Wilson obviously had a terrible stroke and was not really with it. FDR in 1944 had no business running for re-election. And JFK obviously lied about having Addison's disease and was taking a medicine cabinet. Point being is that it will happen again. Could happen with Trump. I mean, but he is older on his inauguration day than Joe Biden was on his inauguration day. But the only way, to your point, it would be very helpful for reporting purposes if there was some forcing mechanism to make people, and politicians and presidents especially, be transparent about their health.
Let me ask you a question. So I know you come across as very Hamisha, but I know you're a very competitive person. So I know that when The Atlantic published their cover story in the first Trump administration by George Conway, alleging that he had malignant personality disorder, then I'm sure you read it. Would you have ever printed that?
I wouldn't speak to The Atlantic, but I think the business of imputing an illness, a mental illness, by somebody who's not a professional to begin with, that's hard for me to go to.
Yeah. I remember people,
is George Conway a psychiatrist?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
But I remember psychiatrists writing books about George W. Bush.
Yeah.
Books alleging his alleged mental problems. So, I mean, like, we're not physicians, you know.
This is a hard one. What's the rule called about
The Goldwater rule, I think.
Yeah, explain what that is.
Well, in 1964, you had a lot of psychiatrists claim that Barry Goldwater was crazy. And even though they hadn't diagnosed him in the aftermath of it, psychiatrists decided that you couldn't diagnose someone from afar. Now, a lot of them still do, but the intention was that...
It's a totally legit question, because you could also come up with people who are great world leaders who on the psychiatric couch might have all kinds of pathologies.
Churchill?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Great leaders.
I don't think he lacked for narcissism.
Right, but
Barack Obama, I wrote a book about Obama, and there was a great quote that he gave, that he said, in order to run for president, some part of you has to be crazy, because what you are doing is you are proposing yourself to an entire nation of 300 million people that you are uniquely qualified to be the leader of the nation and what used to be called the free world. Yeah. That thins out a lot of the population.
I mean, I can't think of a president that didn't have some degree of narcissism, right? I mean, you have to.
Yeah. One lovely question from somebody in the audience. As a young person who grew up during Trump 1 and the Biden administration, it's difficult to not feel disillusioned with our political system. How has your work on this book impacted your own faith in our polity? How can we regain faith in American government?
Well, this book made me more cynical. So,
yeah.
But I would say that something that always makes me sort of more optimistic and hopeful is that America's always been a mess, and George Washington hid his health, as I just said, and we've done bad things, we've done terrible things, we've had terrible leaders, we've had scandals, and somehow we like keep going. So I guess that's sort of what makes me optimistic, because, and it's all just about like, are there good people trying to do the right thing? And often they lose, but not always.
Same question, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, I was born during the Nixon years and the Vietnam War era, so it's not as though it was great at the time. And the 70s were atrocious. And I mean, I understand why a young person would feel disillusioned, but we are not our presidents, and our presidents are not us. They are servants who are supposed to lead our country for 4 to 8 years. And, I'm not saying that you should find faith in other leaders beyond the presidency, but there are politicians who are good people. There are public servants who really are trying to do good and try to be transparent. I think we have a very flawed system that doesn't encourage independence and doesn't encourage courage. I think partisanship is part of that. And I would just argue that think for yourself, don't necessarily, because I'm talking to the one young person here, think for yourself, I'm not young either, so it's not meant personally. Don't think that you have to suit up every night and watch one channel and vote one way. Just think about what you care about and who are the people that best embody that, and don't invest in politicians. That's not where, our system is not there to encourage courage and the right thing, I don't think. And I'm with Alex. This book made me, it didn't make me more cynical, it just made me more amazed at the degree to which people can get away with things based on the threat of how bad the other guy is, and also the fact that there is no incentive structure for courage in our politics.
Finally, and this is a remarkable piece of reporting, but I'm asking a question that's of a dimension that sometimes reporters are not always comfortable with, and it's the prescriptive mode. After doing all this reporting and thinking about this passage in history and what happened, the consequences of what happened, what has to change institutionally? What outcome, I mean, Republican, Democrat, but what has to change to prevent this from happening again?
I mean, if you see something, say something.
That's an encouragement for courage, but is there any policy change that, like, having to do with medical exams or psychology?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before, like, if there was a way to force the presidential doctor under threat of penalty of perjury to submit to Congress the full health records every year, what pills they are taking, all the sorts of tests, I mean, I think that would force institutionally disclosure.
Every medication, the results of every test, we have a right to know that. This person controls the life or death of the planet. We have a right to know if they have some sort of medication that might affect them one way or the other, I think.
Fair enough. Jake and Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thanks to David Remnick.
Thanks.
Thank you.